Life has a funny way of turning upside down when you least expect it. One day, you're happily married, expecting a child, and the next, you're caught in a whirlwind of lies, betrayal, and chaos. What started as a seemingly perfect life quickly spiraled into a nightmare, leaving me to question everything I thought I knew about my wife, my marriage, and myself. I've known my wife for 6 years, and we've been married for 5. I'm 28 and she's 27. Right now, she's pregnant and has taken a break from her job as a police officer to prepare for the baby. The trouble began when a couple of jerk cops showed up at my door to threaten me. We got into a massive argument that she started, and I ended up throwing her out of the house. One of the officers seemed to think that just because he had a badge, I should be scared of him. This guy used to be her partner in the patrol car back when she was still active on the force. They'd been working together for about a year, and my wife has been with the police for 4 years. Ever since she started partnering with this guy, about a year ago, her behavior's been off, and our marriage has been crumbling. During our argument, things got ugly, and she slapped me first, so I threw her out. Then she called him, and he showed up, threatening to throw me in jail if I kept provoking her. I've always had a hunch that something was going on between them, and now I'm convinced. Let me give you some background on how this all started. Back when my wife was thinking about becoming a police officer, she had just finished community college with a degree in criminal justice. I was between jobs then, and we were struggling financially. The police department offered good pay, so it was an easy decision for her to join. She never planned on it being a lifelong career because of the risks involved. I remember one incident when she responded to a domestic dispute, and it ended with her getting seriously hurt. I had to visit her in the hospital. What happened was, she got called to a domestic dispute between a woman and her drunk boyfriend. She showed up at the guy's door thinking it might be a simple situation, since she didn't have a partner that day because her partner was sick. She knocked, but there was no response. Then she heard a woman screaming inside, so she called for backup and tried to get in. It took her a few minutes, but she eventually managed to enter. When she did, she found the drunk guy attacking his wife. She pulled out her taser to subdue him, but it only made him angrier. He came at her before she could reach her firearm, and they got into a struggle with her taking the brunt of it. She held on until backup arrived and intervened. It was a terrifying experience for both of us, a real near-death situation. When I visited her in the hospital, she looked like she'd been in a car crash. Seeing her lying there was one of the worst days of my life. Her face was swollen and the doctor said she almost lost an eye. It was a wake-up call for both of us. I stayed by her side for 2 days. Her recovery took time, not just physically but mentally too. She had to take paid leave for almost a month. During her recovery, we had a serious talk about her switching from law enforcement to becoming a TSA agent. It wouldn't pay as much, but it would give me peace of mind knowing she was safer. As a police officer, every day she walked out the door could be her last. Around that time, I was close to finishing my mechanic training and doing side jobs to cover our bills. After she recovered, she went back to work, but was given a desk job to rebuild her confidence. I remember during her first week at the desk job, she came home complaining about how slow it was and how she missed the action. I reminded her about what happened when she rushed into action without waiting for backup and assured her she'd get used to it. My wife has this habit of talking about her work in great detail when she gets home. I usually let her vent because it's either me or a therapist, but we can't afford a therapist, so I'm her sounding board. About 6 months into her desk job, she started talking about this guy who had recently left the Marines and joined the police force. She'd complain about how cocky he was, acting like some kind of G.I. Joe. She spoke about him with annoyance, going on about his arrogance and how much she despised him. She even mentioned hearing stories of him mistreating detainees and breaking the law. I usually told her to blow the whistle or just ignore it. Honestly, I thought she might be overreacting. From what she described, it seemed like she was jealous. My wife has always disliked overly arrogant people. I remember how much she loathed Trump and couldn't stop talking about him. She even attended a women's march against him and became more liberal because of it. I've never been into politics, so I figured she was just venting her frustration, thinking this guy was a mini Trump. This carried on for about a month, then it suddenly stopped. She stopped talking about him, and at first I was relieved, but a few weeks later, she started talking about going back to field work. I told her it wasn't a good idea. She dropped the subject for a while but kept bringing it up, insisting she'd only have light duties. I reminded her that light duty had landed her in the hospital before, hoping that would end the conversation. Later, she mentioned working extra shifts. While I appreciated her wanting to contribute more, it struck me as odd since we weren't in financial trouble at the time. We were doing fine, and she wanted kids. I did want kids eventually, but wasn't in a rush. I began suspecting that she had returned to patrol secretly, so I tried to catch her in the act when she told me she was working overtime. I went to the police station where she was supposed to be, but I couldn't get into the office area without her seeing me, so I waited outside, hoping to catch her during lunch or at the end of her shift. Unfortunately, my patience wore thin, and I went home. When she got back from work, I confronted her about it. She lied, saying she had been in her office, knowing full well that I couldn't verify it because they wouldn't let me into her office area. To catch her in the act, I went so far as to buy a police radio scanner, like you see in movies. I listened to it for 2 days and recorded her transmissions. To my surprise, the guy she had been bad-mouthing, the one she compared to Trump, was now her new patrol partner. At this point, I wasn't exactly suspecting an affair. I was more worried about her lying and potentially getting herself into another dangerous situation. She seemed to be channeling her inner G.I. Jane, wanting to live out adventures from her favorite cop shows. To me, she seemed too delicate for a patrol job. Not everyone is cut out for it, and I couldn't understand why they allowed her to do it. That night, I confronted her again. I reminded her she was now partnered with her so-called adversary, Donald Trump. She claimed she had no choice, and he was the only available option, that they made them partners, and she had no say. She even tried to spin it positively, saying I should be happy because having someone brave enough to partner with her would keep her safer. I countered that she wouldn't need protection if she had stayed at her desk job or quit the police force entirely, but she dismissed my concerns. After catching her lie, she began opening up about how much she enjoyed being in the police force now and how invigorated she felt. She expressed dreams of becoming a detective and climbing the ranks. It was clear that someone had been feeding her these ideas, likely her new partner. She was starting to sound more like him every day. I should have seen this as a red flag, but I trusted my wife and chose to ignore it. Gradually, I noticed my wife changing into someone I hardly recognized. Her conversations shifted, and the way she spoke to me was different. Her work hours became unpredictable, and our planned quality time was now based on when her patrol partner decided to work overtime. She'd sometimes abruptly change our plans to join him on patrol. I pointed out that this wasn't the military, and they weren't at war, so she couldn't just cancel our time together for her work partner. I argued that they could easily find a replacement for him. Her response drove me nuts. She said she didn't want to disappoint him. This is when my suspicions of an affair began. When I confronted her and suggested she stop partnering with him due to my concerns, she accused me of being insecure. She reassured me that he was married with kids and would never cheat on his wife. To me, this implied she had at least thought about cheating with him since she was vouching for his loyalty. She brushed off my concerns, saying that women at work were constantly hitting on him, but he remained faithful. He consistently liked all of her photos on Facebook. Who does that, especially with a married woman? I confronted her about it, and she just said he was her work partner. From that point on, our marriage was in trouble. I started to resent my wife because she refused to stop working with this guy, and it seemed like she didn't care how uncomfortable it made me. Even when I pressed her, she claimed she had stopped. But when I checked with people at her job, they confirmed he was still her patrol partner. Eventually, she mentioned wanting a break from the police force to have kids and said she'd stop taking her birth control. I didn't find it suspicious at the time, maybe because her partner had kids and she wanted to follow suit. Plus, I wanted kids too. About a month later, she got pregnant. A little over 3 months after that, I landed a high-paying job as a field technician for a medical equipment service company. The pay was too good to pass up, but it meant traveling 3 days a week. At this point, my wife was about 3 or 4 months pregnant and had taken some time off work. I found it odd that she stayed home all day without doing much, but I didn't dwell on it. After one of my 3-day business trips, I came home and my neighbor, who I was friendly with because I'd done some free car repairs for him, informed me that a police officer had visited my house 3 days in a row and stayed for hours. This was while my wife wasn't working. She was supposed to be off work, so there was no good reason for a police car to be parked outside our house. When my wife got home, I confronted her. At first, she denied everything, but when I mentioned the neighbors had seen him, she changed her story. She claimed she was lonely with me gone and needed company, insisting it was innocent. I pointed out that she had plenty of friends she could have called, so why him? She accused me of being paranoid and insecure. I shot back that her suspicious behavior was the real issue. Things quickly spiraled out of control. She slapped me twice and tried for a third before I grabbed her hand. At 5 months pregnant, I was careful not to hurt her, but her aggression didn't surprise me. She had hit me a few times in the past, especially when she knew she was wrong or losing an argument. I restrained her, turned her around, lifted her, and carried her to the door while she fought to break free. She was screaming and cursing at me as I forced her out. I knew the neighbors heard, but I wasn't letting her stay in the house that night. I gently placed her outside and locked the door before she could get up. She tried to force the door open but gave up and went to the neighbors to borrow a phone. Instead of calling the police, her family, or friends, she called that arrogant patrol partner of hers. He showed up at my door, acting like he owned the place, with another officer in tow. They accused me of all sorts of things, but luckily, I had scars from her attack and photos to prove she was the aggressor. He seemed ready to use force, maybe to clear the way for his affair with my wife. She had already lied, saying I started the fight, but had no proof. I had the evidence, yet I still ended up in handcuffs, treated like a criminal in my own home, and was asked to leave for the night. I spent the night at my neighbor's, shaken by what had happened. I have decided to sue. He even falsified the incident report. The next morning, I returned home. My wife seemed remorseful, apologizing for everything, including hitting me and lying. Even though her lies almost ruined me, I told her we needed to separate, at least until the baby was born. She was worried about support until she could work again, so I suggested she lean on the lover she called for help. I moved out the next day, but agreed to keep paying half the lease since my name was on it. Still, I couldn't live there knowing she was involved with another man. She can deny it all she wants, but the truth is clear. 2 days after I left, she kept calling, asking me to come back. I told her I was out of town for work, and it was best for us to stay separated until the baby was born. I planned to get my things after finishing my field assignment. We stayed in touch, and she denied the affair every time I brought it up, getting angry whenever I mentioned it. I had no concrete proof, just my suspicions. She managed to turn our family and friends against me, telling them I was abandoning her and spreading lies. My parents took her side because they wanted to be grandparents. When I shared my suspicions and mentioned she involved her lover in kicking me out, they didn't believe me. Her dad, who I never got along with, even called to threaten me. I hung up on him, knowing he never liked me anyway. We had 3 mutual friends, and she got to them first, crying and playing the victim. They all sympathized with her. Everyone dismissed my concerns, thinking I was lying and she couldn't possibly do such things. I've already spoken to my lawyer about suing the police department for the illegal detainment and eviction. That officer even filed a false report against me. Over the next 2 weeks, we had many phone conversations trying to sort things out. She managed to get everyone on her side, including my parents. Without solid proof of her affair, I started doubting myself. My neighbor kept an eye on things and said he never saw the police car around, and my wife rarely left the house, except for groceries. I began to think maybe I was wrong. A month after our separation, with my wife about 6 months pregnant, we reconciled, and I moved back in. It felt like old times, almost like nothing had happened. She made sure I didn't suspect anything, but I couldn't be home all the time because of work. I couldn't rely on my neighbor to always watch, so I installed hidden cameras to catch her if she was still up to something. I installed cameras in the bedroom, living room, and driveway, setting them up for the perfect opportunity for her to cheat, while I traveled more than ever before, sometimes being away for an entire week. For nearly a month, I meticulously reviewed the footage, but there was no sign of her work partner, and her behavior didn't seem suspicious at all. It looked like there was nothing to see. I eventually gave up, my suspicions still lingering, but with no evidence to back them up. Since she wouldn't admit to anything, I had nothing substantial to go on. Skipping ahead to when she was about 7.5 months pregnant, our troubled past seemed like a distant memory. During this time, I decided to limit my work travel to stay close to her as she neared her due date. Spending more time with her, I couldn't help but notice she was frequently engrossed in texting on her phone. At first, I thought it was just friends and family reaching out, so I didn't pay much attention. However, as it continued, it started to bother me. It got to the point where I couldn't enjoy our time together because her phone was constantly buzzing. What struck me as suspicious was how she responded to her texts. She'd smile, chuckle, and try to hide it, almost as if she didn't want me to notice. I didn't initially suspect she was cheating. Given her condition, she was nearly 8 months pregnant. However, one evening while we were watching TV, her phone received a text, and she immediately walked into the bathroom, making it obvious she was hiding something. I turned down the TV volume and approached the bathroom door, hoping to overhear. But all I heard was her typing away on her phone. That was when I started to suspect something was amiss. My wife used an iPhone with fingerprint verification, and we never shared passwords. So, I waited for her to fall asleep one night. Once she was out, I carefully used her finger to unlock her phone and tiptoed into the bathroom to read her messages. The last person she had been texting was someone named Sophie. The only message visible from Sophie was "Sweet dreams," which seemed innocent enough. But here's the catch. My wife had been in the bathroom texting for a good 30 minutes, and the last text on her phone before Sophie's was from 3 hours earlier. Clearly, she had deleted the other messages to hide something. My instincts kicked in, and I felt a sickening sensation in my stomach. I began to suspect she might still be cheating, or had never stopped and just become more discreet. I jotted down Sophie's number and returned to bed, but I could barely sleep. The next day, during my lunch break, I went to a payphone and dialed the number. I had a strong hunch it belonged to her patrol partner. Pretending to be from a utility company, I mentioned his name, and he confirmed his identity with a simple, "This is me." All my suspicions came rushing back, and I realized I wasn't just imagining things. I was too exhausted to confront her immediately. Considering she was due to give birth soon, I planned to leave her after the baby arrived. Yet every time I looked at her pregnant belly, I felt a deep attachment and wanted to spend my life with her. I couldn't understand why she couldn't just stay loyal so we could have the perfect family. I wanted to ask her why she kept lying and causing me so much pain, but I was visibly depressed and anxious, especially with the baby on the way. A few months later, she gave birth to a baby boy. It never crossed my mind that the baby might not be mine. I thought he looked more like her, but at that age, it's tough to tell. After she was discharged from the hospital, I waited a few days before confronting her about the text messages. She claimed it was just a female friend, but I told her I had called the number and her patrol partner had answered. She denied it, so I suggested we open the texts and call the number on speakerphone. She refused, and that was the final straw. I expressed my frustration and told her I was moving out again. She pleaded with me, and finally admitted it was her coworker. She explained she had hidden his number because he kept texting her, and she didn't want to seem ungrateful by ignoring him. She knew I'd be upset if I found out, which is why she used a fake name. I insisted she quit her job as a police officer and find another one, and she agreed. I also asked her to block his number and cut off contact with him, which she did right in front of me. I wasn't naive. I knew she could unblock it and continue the affair in secret, but it seemed like she was trying to make things right and keep me from leaving. Things went smoothly with no major issues. Both our families came to celebrate the arrival of the baby, and for a while it felt like we were on the path to mending our relationship. We even started house hunting since we were still renting. I began traveling more for work to save up for a down payment. With a newborn and an unemployed wife, our expenses were high. I was thrilled to be a new father, and my wife wanted to take time off to be with the baby. I agreed, preferring she look after our child rather than relying on daycare or a babysitter, at least until he was a bit older. A few months later, while on a field assignment, I noticed something troubling. There were times when I called her, but she wouldn't answer or return my calls, even in the evenings when she should have been home. It struck me as odd because she wasn't working, and her main responsibility was taking care of our baby. Talking to my neighbor, I learned that my wife often spent nights away from home when I was gone. My suspicions grew, and I knew she wouldn't confess unless I had concrete evidence. So when I returned home that week, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I bought a GPS device and secretly installed it in her car. I needed to find out where she was going with our child when I was away, and why she was ignoring my calls. I spoke to my boss and arranged for local assignments for the rest of the month, allowing me to monitor the GPS closely. To keep my intentions hidden, I told my wife I would be traveling out of state so I could follow her movements without raising suspicion. Sure enough, the evening I pretended to leave, she drove to an unfamiliar apartment complex with a gated entrance. I waited until another car opened the gate and followed her in. I parked a few spaces away and watched as she entered one of the units. Not knowing which one, I stayed put and devised a plan to test her honesty. I called her and asked about her whereabouts. She didn't answer, but 30 minutes later she called back. She claimed she was tending to the baby, but the background noise suggested otherwise. I casually asked if she was at home, and she insisted she was. I then told her I was at the airport, my work having wrapped up early, and I'd be home in an hour. She was taken aback and stumbled over her words, saying she needed to tidy up. It became clear she was lying. She abruptly ended the call, promising to call back once my flight landed. 10 minutes later, I saw her leave the apartment with the baby swing in one hand and the baby bag in the other. But what really hit me was seeing her patrol partner following her, carrying the baby as if he were the father. Clearly, she hadn't cut ties with him. My suspicions deepened. The way he carried the baby made me question my paternity. I couldn't hold back any longer and confronted them. They were stunned. I told her not to bother coming home, as I had caught them red-handed. She offered no apology, and they quickly left. I immediately called her father, informing him of what had happened. I told him his daughter was promiscuous and expressed doubts about the baby's paternity. I let him know the baby likely belonged to a man who was already married with children. I admit I lost my cool, but I don't regret it. This woman had been deceiving me for years, constantly lying and manipulating. When I returned home, she was gone as expected. The next day she called me in tears, insisting she hadn't done anything wrong. She said she needed to come back for the baby's supplies, like food and clothes. I told her she could come back, but I was leaving because I doubted the baby's paternity and was pursuing a divorce. She insisted the baby was mine, warning I'd regret denying it. I told her we needed a DNA test to confirm, pointing out she hadn't blocked her patrol partner, making it impossible for me to believe there was nothing between them. She came back with a female friend, likely to avoid escalating the situation. That day, I ordered a DNA kit and had it delivered overnight. I refused to speak to her because I was too emotionally invested. I had provided everything for this baby, and the thought that he might not be mine was too much to bear. When the DNA test kit arrived, I struggled to find a chance to get a swab from the baby, since my wife was always with him. Her friend had left by then, realizing I wasn't a threat. It took 3 days for us to start talking again, and I initiated the conversation just to ask if I could hold the baby one last time. I truly cared for the child and desperately wanted to be his father. Deep down, I hoped the DNA test would confirm he was mine. Eventually, I managed to discreetly collect a genetic sample and send it for testing without my wife's knowledge. When the results came in, I was working across the city. I logged in to view them online, and my heart sank. The baby wasn't mine. I shared the results with my parents to prove they had been wrong to doubt me, but deep down, I wished I had been mistaken. I also sent the results to her father, as a stark reminder of his daughter's betrayal. My wife was the last to receive the results, and she didn't get them from me. After everything she had put me through, she must have suspected the truth. Since we didn't own any joint property, the divorce process shouldn't be prolonged. Legally, I was considered the presumed father because I was married to the child's mother when he was born. So I would need to go through the courts to end the legal parent-child relationship, support obligations, and finalize the divorce. I contacted a divorce lawyer to expedite the process. Update: it's been 14 months since I divorced my unfaithful wife, and a lot has happened since then. I decided to leave the city where I grew up because I was constantly being harassed by the police. I filed complaints twice, sued them twice, and won one case. But the harassment continued, so I chose to move away. I often travel for work and wanted to live in the countryside, where I could enjoy hunting and camping. Since I'm away for work half the time, my exact location didn't matter much. I purchased acres of land for hunting and camping during my downtime. When my wife was served divorce papers at our home while I was out of town, it turned into chaos. She kept trying to call me, but I ignored her calls. 2 days after she was served, I returned with a U-Haul to collect my belongings. She was there and tried to stop me from leaving, but I took only what was rightfully mine, leaving behind anything we had shared. She realized I was done with the marriage, and everyone knew her true character now. She couldn't manipulate our friends anymore, since they had all seen the DNA test results. After packing my things, I asked my ex-wife to let me hold the baby one last time. She agreed. Holding him, I wished more than anything that he was mine. She started crying and apologized for everything when she saw me holding the baby. I quickly returned him to her because I was on the verge of tears myself and didn't want to break down in front of her. I moved in with my parents temporarily, saving money until I found a place I liked. Eventually, I relocated to the countryside and bought a large tract of land with a small lake, perfect for hunting and camping on my own property. When I'm not traveling for work, I spend my time there, embracing a nomadic lifestyle. However, when I return home, I find solace in the peaceful place I can call my own. Through all of this, I can't help but feel that the ones truly suffering are me, my ex-wife, and the innocent baby, while her affair partner seems to escape unscathed. Even though I can't say for certain that he's the baby's father, all the circumstantial evidence points in his direction. They had been working together for over a year, seeing each other for almost 2, and my neighbor even caught him coming to my house, presumably to be with my wife. They were exposed, and he even rented an apartment to meet up with her. I gathered all the evidence, including the DNA results, to expose him. I wanted to send it to his wife, letting her know the truth about her husband. To find him, I used a paid service to locate his home and identify his wife. Once I had their address, I waited until he left for work and his wife was home, then delivered the package of evidence. One evening after leaving a friend's house, I was pulled over by a cop. I wasn't speeding or breaking any laws, so I was curious why I was stopped. Initially, I suspected it was my ex-wife's affair partner, but it was a cop I had never seen before. Being pulled over felt random, especially since it had been years since my last encounter with the police. He claimed I was speeding, which I knew I wasn't, but I took the ticket to avoid the hassle of disputing it in court. Just a week later, I got another ticket for speeding, despite knowing I was within the limit. This felt more like harassment. The police asked for my license and registration, then started asking ridiculous questions about warrants and if the car was stolen. Frustrated, I called their questions stupid, which only angered them. They ordered me to exit the car. I refused, demanding to speak with a supervisor, insisting I had done nothing wrong. Backup was called, and they forcibly pulled me out, handcuffing me. I sustained injuries, cuts on my hands, a split lip, and back pain. I spent the night in jail, and my parents bailed me out the next day. My parents saw the situation for what it was and helped me file a complaint against the arresting officers. My ex-wife's affair partner seemed to be orchestrating this harassment from the shadows. My parents advised me to leave town, fearing for my safety. I decided to move to the countryside, seeking a fresh start away from the corrupt police force targeting me. I was fortunate they didn't plant drugs in my car, which could have ruined my life. I filed a lawsuit against my ex-wife's affair partner for the false police report and sued the arresting officers for unlawful arrest and false imprisonment. Civil litigation required me to prove my case, so I gathered evidence, the affair, the false police report, and the DNA results proving the child wasn't mine. I won a settlement in the lawsuit against the affair partner, but the false imprisonment case was dismissed. I plan to appeal. I filed a complaint against my ex-wife's affair partner with the police department, using the civil judgment. He faced disciplinary action, which will be on his record. Although I don't know the exact details, at least it's a mark against him. I heard that my ex-wife's affair partner's wife finally left him. She must have discovered his deceit and decided to move on. This might be why he's been so vindictive towards me. I haven't spoken to my ex-wife, but mutual friends told me she's back working as a police officer and living with her affair partner in the same apartment where I caught them. In the past few months, I've started dating again, mostly through online platforms. I schedule dates a week in advance, planning them around my travels. I've met several women, some of whom seem like potential partners, but I'm hesitant to consider marriage again. After years of being deceived and manipulated, I feel like a significant part of my life was wasted, The questions linger. What drives someone to betray the ones they love? And can we ever truly know another person? I invite you to share your thoughts and experiences. Have you ever faced a betrayal that changed your life? How did you overcome it? Let's start a conversation and find solace in our shared stories.